separation of church and state from the Supreme Court was the first major thing that happened to this country. I mean, after World War II, we was a pretty strong Christian country.
Oh yeah.
And doing pretty much everything right, trying to. And we came out of World War II stronger than we went in, which is unheard of. But then, like I said, the ruling of separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that came along that I feel like hit this country extremely hard was the pill, birth control pill. Because it was the lie, once again, of the devil.
Right.
But it was, the women were taught the lie that, see, with this pill, you can go out and play around like the boys do without the consequences.
Right.
Because the fear of pregnancy was the biggest thing most women were afraid of.
Oh
you know?
yeah.
and they says, well, see, you with that pill, you don't have to worry about that, so you can be like the boys. Well, number one, that was a lie, because it created the birth of the demand for abortions, because all of a sudden unplanned pregnancy went through the roof, over just the next few years. So that brought about the abortion industry.
Yeah.
It brought about the women's lib doctrines and teachings, because they felt like they could get out of the house now and they could do what they want, and all this other stuff. So it brought that into to being. And so all of this came in because of the pill. The third one that was, to me, was just as devastating, and it is like a two-pronged attack, and that was the war in Vietnam. Because if you remember what happened in Vietnam, the first thing about it was they opened the draft back up because they had to get people in the army.
Right.
And most of the kids didn't want to go. Well, the government passed a rule that said that if you're married or if you're in college, you don't have to go to the army.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you got all these 18-year-old boys out here, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys. They're not married, and they definitely don't want to go to Vietnam. So they went to college.
Yeah.
Up until then, you get out of school, you find a job, you go to work, and you finally wind up getting married, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, they're trying to stay out of the army, and so they're going to college. Well, if you're going to college to avoid getting drafted, you're going to take the easiest courses you can find.
Oh yeah.
And I'm going to get in trouble with some of the students or teachers, but the easiest subjects in school has always been the liberal arts.
Right.
Sociology, psychology, all the other ologies and stuff. And that's where all of this crazy doctrine that we have was pushed into these kids' heads. And you got very impressionable 18, 19-year-old kids that are already somewhat rebellious. That's why they're in school instead of in the army. And so they bought this stuff. And what did I say earlier? The doctrines of school in this generation's is going to be a rule of government in the next.
That is
and so
correct.
As soon as they started getting out and turning 25 and 35, the two ages to get into the government, they started going in, and they're taking all those in, and you see the country going that direction. The second prong of the Vietnam War was it brought drugs into mainstream America. Because up until then, you had drugs on the East Coast and on the West Coast, but other than that, it's pretty, that's just stuff you saw in the movies and it never happened. But you got all these kids that went to Vietnam, and so my prejudice is showing. You got these Midwest farmer kids that are good, solid kids, they're the ones that went in the army, and they're the ones that got indoctrinated to the drugs.
They did, and they knew how to grow.
Yeah. And so then they brought it back. They brought the drug use and drug addictions and everything else back to America.
Right.
And so now you've got all of this involved. So you've got drugs, you've got rebellion, because remember all of the riots in the colleges and
stuff.
The
60s were.
And and all of that came out of Vietnam. So, like I said, separation of church and state. You can't say God said.
Right.
Number two, you ladies can go out and do whatever you want to do, because you don't have to worry about getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And then number three, to deal with the Vietnam War.